what's next for sustainability in the post-COVID world. So, Christopher, you're very well placed to discuss this, given your role as advisor to a number of both private and governmental organisations and policy and what have you. So, Christopher, over to you.
Thank you very much. Essentially, what I would say is that sort of COVID, whilst it has created this enormous economic shock, and that's affected a number of economies with their ambitions of investment, it has actually made everyone focus on their entire supply chain and business with that sort of importance of frontline services and resilience and your partners. So there's a number of things there. You're thinking, right, how well do you know your business and what are you looking for? And I think that this transparency conversation comes through to sort of, well, how do you understand who you're working with? How do you work with other people in the future? And I'm quite encouraged by a couple of things. From a corporate level, I'm actually working on a project at the moment with some of the large investors on an outcomes-based screening tool, looking at companies to say, well, what should be in place? What questions are you asking and what should they have? So that's culture and operational activity. And these are some of the big institutional guys saying, look, all very well, the sort of investment and screening via reporting, that's telling me what you want me to hear. What about sort of what is in place? What is the evidence? So I've seen some activity coming through on that outcomes based, which fits much more closely with things like SDGs and those. Secondly, I'm seeing the emergence of sort of great technologies to help sort of facilitate this. For example, I know there's a couple of organizations I'm working with who are turning biodiversity into big data. So you're saying, well, okay, we've got the emergence of TNFD, so the Task Force for sort of nature-based financial disclosure. So the equivalent of sort of flora and fauna in the same sense as climate. So you're actually putting financial metrics around critical biodiversity and ecosystems. And the fact you can now use tools such as eDNA, so you can use DNA from soils and water to go and sort of say what species are there. You can have a database that tells you that, even if you don't know what the damn thing is. You know that in future it is a species, it exists, the DNA tells you, you have a database. So that is coming through, and a number of the asset managers are incorporating that into it. So it's beginning of this year, Minrover, Sycamore, Paribas, all setting up biodiversity databases. So really simply, I think there's some really encouraging stuff to go and understand what data is coming through, which is helping you understand, well, where do you need to go to change the infrastructure of your business, be it an asset management portfolio. So you're a BlackRock with trillions of dollars invested in some latent infrastructure, which has a 40-year lifespan. Your investors have a certain risk appetite. How do you transition to something which has a different risk appetite? So you need to, I think there's a few things you can look at, is around investing in that sort of enabling tech so that you as the corporate can actually own the message. Because what's coming through now is that somebody else will tell your story for you. You can go out and buy satellite AI data for 1,000 square kilometers for only a few $100s. That'll give somebody else in civil society the ability to tell a story about where you are flaring, what you are doing, where civil society is encroaching on your properties, or where your employees are not doing anything. They will tell the story before you do, if you don't have control on that message. You need to have that diligence on the management, and that goes beyond the strategy, as you say, into the culture, to go and say, well, are you actually doing the right things? What are the outcomes? What style of business are you trying to create? And that with COVID, when you look at different styles of organizations saying sort of, I advise people to go off and become shelf stackers in Tesco's, gives you one style of sort of corporate leadership versus, okay, we're going to look after people, we won't fire anybody, we're going to look after you through this crisis. There's ways to go and understand the outcomes. There's an engagement conversation because, as you said, through the context of what you're trying to achieve, as an active manager, you're much more likely to be sort of engaging with management. You'll probably ask the questions. Passives, no offense to those who are on the call, while passives tend to be much more screening out before you get into it. So even more importance for the organization to have a much clearer story. But I would say that there's still a waiting to say, if someone has sustainability at slide 43 out of 44, you know where their management thinking is. You need to go and sort of change that sort of metric on engagement. So what's important, how are you driving it? The supply chain resilience, it isn't just around so where your stuff's coming from. It's around your business, your resources, your staff, your partners, your cyber. There's another focus around sort of the information there, and there's a clarity that needs to come. And the actions and collaboration, well, you know, you can't do it yourself. So there's a cross-sector challenge here with net zero. As everyone has sort of seen, okay, you need the raw materials, you need the clean energy, you probably need some electronics, but you probably need some enabling finance, and you probably want to be driving around in a car, which is electric. So each of these has about 4 or 5 different industries engaged to it. And you've got to look at the physical and the financial flows that link up the artisanal miner who's probably legally got a job in Central Africa trying to do something, but you want to make sure it's done properly, through to the electronics factory in Seattle. How do you get that sort of physical and financial flow tied up? So there's a really interesting cross-sector challenge to go and sort of link it all up. As I say, that I think is where it's quite encouraging, with where sort of Corona's up to people to sort of think a little bit more about their own habits of what they're trying to achieve. But it does have a certain amount of risk and assurance to sort of make sure, so what about the governance? Okay, well, people are going to get held to account, because that reputation piece of this, or the ESG, is going to get more importance, and how you have behaved, what are the outcomes. Formal reporting is playing catch up to a lot of this. So I think management has an interesting task to tell a better story.